the long view, in the long view, the long view has to be that Palestinian lives must not be controlled by Israel.
And just because there's been this, whatever we want to call it, a significant reduction in the mass murder of people in Gaza right now, because of the Trump administration, I think that in itself retroactively makes a vote for Trump over Harris the morally superior vote. And I don't say that to praise Trump. I say that to condemn the Democrats that they managed to put themselves in such a position that voting for Donald Trump could accurately be said to be the morally superior alternative to voting for the Democratic candidate, which, really should just condemn them to hell for eternity.
Like Israel is trying to exterminate the population of Gaza, and they get a blank check from the West. And the resistance in Gaza is trying to find a threshold beyond which the Israeli military is unable to continue. And so like I've the whole war I was watching this and thinking what's going to happen first, like who's going to break first? And to me it seems like Israel broke first.
Liberals have shown to be more like weak conservatives than weak leftists. If they're weak, that's how they're weak. Because they have to pretend like they're not racist when in fact they're clearly deeply racist. Like I'm sorry, you can't champion a genocide and get away with saying we care about human rights. Like it's just absurd. It's one of the things I do on Twitter is use onion headlines, and the problem has been that they've been fairly accurate. Like it was supposed to be satire. That's what the Onion was supposed to be, like satirical, but it's not really. I mean, they are fairly accurate depictions of the current situation, and that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. Like the Democratic Party is a parody.
Hi guys. I'm Justin. So I'm on YouTube as Justin Podur, on Twitter as Justin Podur, but I kind of call what I do the Anti-Empire Project. I have a Substack too during the 470 days of the Gaza war. I was doing these sit reps, I guess, every 3 or 4 days, reporting on the military situation. And saw you guys comment. You guys commented on one of them, and then I was like, "Hey, who are these guys?" And then I realized I actually knew you from your channel. Or maybe I commented on one of your posts. Anyway, it's good to meet you guys. I've been watching you all for a while, and Assal in particular. I try to learn from your Twitter. You're one of the like Twitter artists to me. Like you are a master of that form to me. So it's great to
That's
meet
very
you.
kind. Thank you.
So, shall we get started discussing our thoughts about the ceasefire? Thank God we finally have one, at least in a form. Uh, I don't know. Shall we just go around and share our thoughts? Maybe Asal first?
Sure. I mean, so I have so many thoughts. Why you started with me, I have no idea. But I have many thoughts, and I'll try to narrow them down so that everybody has a chance to talk about it. First is just the fact that the Biden admin made it seem like they just couldn't do anything, like they were trying so hard and having all those really tough conversations, but they couldn't really exert any more pressure. And then Trump comes in and immediately there's a ceasefire. So there's that. That's my first comment. Just the ridiculousness. The level of lying out of Biden officials is just becoming more and more clear with every day that passes. Um, the second point to that, going back to that point, is the amount of aid that's suddenly going in, right? Biden officials said, the security situation on the ground has to change. As long as Hamas is in power, there's nothing that can be done about it. And Israel isn't doing anything to prevent aid from getting in. It's the situation on the ground. And 2,400 trucks have gone in all of a sudden. Another lie. Um, But also, and this will be my last point on my initial reaction to the ceasefire, is that Palestinians are still being killed. So, yes, there is a ceasefire. Yes, that we don't see the same daily death tolls, the daily bombardment. Aid is getting in. People are allowed to return to their homes, which is really just rubble. Um, but Palestinians are still being killed in Gaza. And the reason I point that out is because there's been so much emphasis on this idea and this narrative that there was a ceasefire on October 6th. On October 6th, there was a ceasefire, and then Hamas attacked, and that's what created this war. And the pushback that I've shared about that in the past is that Palestinians were still dying. Palestinians were under blockade, apartheid, occupation. They were being killed in the West Bank on an almost daily basis, right? This is a daily occupation, that's military occupation that they've been under for very many decades. And so the idea that there was a ceasefire was always sort of framed as, well, as long as Israelis are safe, then there's a ceasefire. And this is so emblematic of that, right? Palestinians can still be killed, but nobody will question that currently there is a ceasefire despite that. And I just thought that was a great illustration of what was so problematic about saying things like there was a ceasefire on October 6th.
Wow. Sorry, I just couldn't find the right button. Why don't you give us your thoughts, Justin?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'll pick up on exactly this point of there was a ceasefire on October 6th because it's like a ceasefire has a very specific meaning here. And the ceasefire that Hamas has been offering to Israel, they call it a hudna, and it's basically a long-term ceasefire, which is not all that different from a two-state solution. I mean, that's kind of like what Hamas's position was. It was basically, calm for calm, and it's Sinwar that talked about this a lot in his, the last long interviews that we had with him long before this war, um, and and the idea was that it's not a ceasefire unless the siege is also lifted. So, um, they went from like right now there are trucks going in and the border is somewhat open in some ways. The north is still somewhat besieged because Israel controls these two corridors, and but the ceasefire agreement that Israel agreed to actually at the end of it, in theory, also ends the siege, which means not just the October 6th, which was not a ceasefire according to this, but pre 2005, when the siege was massively tightened by Israel. So it's it's not a ceasefire if there's a siege, and it's not. And this ceasefire agreement, whether Israel fulfills it or not, and Israel doesn't have any record of ever fulfilling agreements, they barely have a record of making agreements except under extreme duress. So I think that's one thing, that we can explore tonight, which is, what are the kinds of duress that they were under exactly that led them to accept this, because they wouldn't accept it except under extreme duress and extreme need. So that I think is like the mystery for us to resolve, is if we want to understand where the ceasefire is going and whether the ceasefire will hold. But like there was absolutely no ceasefire on October 6th, simply on the grounds that there was a siege, and that and the long view in the long view the long view has to be that Palestinian lives must not be controlled by Israel. I think like that's kind of like the guiding principle for me, is that Israel should not be controlling anybody that is not Israeli. That's their and if they have a system of rights and democracy and participation for Jewish Israelis, then that should be the extent of who is under their purview as a state. If they yeah, so they shouldn't be anywhere else, and they shouldn't be holding prisoners from other societies, and they shouldn't be controlling territory that belongs to other people. Um, that has fairly profound implications if you think of
Yeah.
how Israel came to be and whose land they're on. But they see themselves as the state of all Jews, so um, you know they shouldn't be on any Arab lands then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good point. And I've been thinking about that as well, that Israel just should not be in control and should not have any control over other people's lives or other groups' lives. Let's put it that way, in particular the Palestinians. Because what this genocide has shown is the kinds of things that have been inflicted on Palestinians for almost a century. Let's be honest here. That stuff was hidden to the public eye. What they did to people at checkpoints, how they let people die there, how they raped kids, women, men. All that stuff was hidden to the public eye. And if you let that happen again, man, I've been thinking about writing an article on this, that this is the moment that activists actually should not let go. This is the moment, the so-called ceasefire, let's see, that actually activists needs to step it up and try to get rid of this apartheid regime. Like find some way that Palestinians do not go back to that old situation. And to get back to what you just said, Asal, about the ceasefire happening so quickly now that Trump is in power. Um, it's so infuriating. It just shows the utter depravity of the ruling class. I don't want to say only the Dems, because let's see what Trump is going to do. He just got 100 million from Adelson. I think that 100 million means something. So let's see what's going to happen. But just how easy it was for them to stop this genocide. It's just so incredibly evil. And I still find it so hard to grasp, the utter evil of the ruling classes. And it brings me also to what I just saw when I was watching BT News with Vijay Prashad. And he said that we should not forget that there's an international division of humanity. And I find it so important to keep highlighting that like that reminds me of what Gerald Horn also always says when he comes on our show, that we, to understand imperialism, a central part of imperialism is a race/white supremacy analysis. And it's so important, and Vijay Prashad repeated that today as well, that what you see in Palestine is just another recycling of that international division of humanity, where everybody who's not European is just expendable. It's just expendable like a bunch of animals. You know what I mean? Okay, well, that's a lot of thoughts, so maybe you have something to say, Peter.
Can I actually ask something really quick? Sorry, Peter.
Sure.
And you're muted, Peter. So there's that. Uh, while you figure that out, I just wanted to add one thing to what you were saying, because I think when we talk about Trump, because you said we have to wait and see, right? And when I say, look how quickly, right, when even a little bit of actual leverage is used, it is not a compliment to Donald Trump. That's not what I'm saying at all. Because again, he is such an enigma, right? Like he'll do that, but then at the same time lift sanctions on the like handful of people that the Biden admin put on settlers in the West Bank, right? The Biden administration put sanctions on settlers in the West Bank was itself ridiculous. It's just all for show and performance. It doesn't actually address any of the issues, especially the occupying military that they arm and fund, and the state that allows all of this to happen that they arm and fund. But it was more, the comment is more on, to your point, Kareem, the depravity of the Biden admin, right? The fact that they just lied over and over for months, and everybody knew that they were lying, and everybody was calling them out for lying, but they just continued to do it. Joe Biden had the power to stop this like October 2023, he had the power, and he never ever used it to stop them from doing anything. And that was the point, right? It's the juxtaposition of how Biden wielded power versus how Trump is doing it. And Trump is doing it because it's in his own self-interest, in the sense that he wants to be able to say, look, I did it. right? Like I'm doing the things that they couldn't do. And to distinguish himself, he's doing these things as well. So I thought that was important to point out. It's less to applaud Donald Trump. The bare minimum you can do is stop a genocide from continuing. That's not, but the Biden admin couldn't even do that.
Yeah, exactly. The I don't know. I've been in such a kind of cynical mind frame that I look for like the black humor in everything. And the thing that stands out more than anything is, remember when there were those Arab American groups in Michigan that endorsed Trump at the end of the campaign, and a lot of people were saying, oh my God, what idiots! They're gonna totally get rolled. What a terrible decision! What an immoral decision! And just because there's been this, whatever we want to call it, a significant reduction in the mass murder of people in Gaza right now because of the Trump administration, I think that in itself retroactively makes a vote for Trump over Harris the morally superior vote. And I don't say that to praise Trump. I say that to condemn the Democrats that they managed to put themselves in such a position that voting for Donald Trump could accurately be said to be the morally superior alternative to voting for the Democratic candidate, which, really should just condemn them to hell for eternity. Um, Whether, I think that there's anything real there, the odds are very heavily in on the side of Trump is doing this as a temporary thing, boost his popularity, et cetera, et cetera. Once the rubber hits the road and the Israeli government and the Israel lobby starts putting pressure on him, and majorities of Democrats and Republicans in the Congress put pressure on him, he'll cave as he did during his first administration on any number of issues and go right back to endorsing genocide full-throatedly and ethnic cleansing and redeveloping Gaza, under Israeli auspices. That's still the most likely outcome as of now, given publicly available information about Trump, his first record, etc. On the other hand, the really interesting thing is that right now, in this moment, and I don't think this moment will last very long, but there's a non-zero chance that this might actually be the an indication of Trump breaking from the blob consensus, including the Israel lobby. Now, again, I'll just say I don't think that that's a very high chance at all. I would put it somewhere after the decimal point after a zero, but it's still non-zero totally. The video he posted of Jeffrey Sachs talking about Netanyahu dragging the U.S. into the Iraq War, very, very possible, very likely, I would say, that he only posted it because he heard the part about uh, Obama funding the Syria dirty war and said, "Oh, great, this guy's insulting Obama. I'm going to repost it," and he didn't even hear the rest of the video. That's entirely possible as well. His few appointments that the Israel lobby has been getting their pennies in a bunch over, that also could be entirely irrelevant. But the other possibility is it's a sign of a willingness on his part to break from the blob consensus and try to get Saudi, UAE, etc., on board with a kind of renewed Abraham Accords that he can use to try to burnish his image, get a Nobel Peace Prize, etc., etc. Again, I'll just reiterate for the third time, I think it's very unlikely. But the interesting point is that right now, in this moment, given publicly available information, that's a possibility we can't discount, which is insane on its own and just worth mentioning at least. Although, the political economy argument that Kareem brought up, the golden rule argument that money rules and politics, I still think that's where you'd put your money on if you were betting on this, and you would want to kind of hedge emotionally for that kind of disappointment because that's most likely what's going to happen. But it just still shocks me that we're in this situation now where we can't entirely discount the possibility that Trump would break from the blob consensus, get himself assassinated, and we'll see what happens. But what an insane situation we're in right now.
Your thoughts, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, the there's so many variables that go into this. I mean, the my reading of the military situation was that the Israeli military, the Israeli army, uh, didn't like dying even in small numbers on in this kind of drip death by a thousand cuts in Gaza. They're just, when you read what they were doing there, they talk about how they felt like Nazis, but then the other ones who are giving like field reports are like at nighttime. We're huddled. We don't that's when they come out. We don't know they're watching us from cameras everywhere. And you look at the resistance videos that, Qassam brigades and the Red Triangle videos, and you see like whatever the Israelis are covering up, their armored vehicles are blowing up with their people inside of them. They're driving over improvised explosive devices. Their officers are getting sniped. So it's an experience that I think the Israeli army, they expected a certain outcome a long time ago. And I think they were probably reporting to Netanyahu that we can, however long we do this for, the outcome is going to be the same. We can't really change this outcome. We can't get rid of Hamas. We can't go into the tunnels. We can't get the hostages back except through a deal. So, at some point, it almost is better for Netanyahu that Trump calls it off than he calls it off himself because the military tells him they don't want to fight anymore. So I just want to say that the number of things that lead to this, and it's hard to weigh up how much of each of these things matters. But I do think that the military situation was not gonna was not going anywhere. They'd already destroyed every hospital twice. They'd already, taken thousands of people to their torture camps, and they were unable to address the actual armed resistance that was catching them. Pretty much every day they were taking out a few Israeli soldiers. It wasn't a huge rate. They're not able to, there's a lot there they were not able to do because it's such an asymmetric war. But I think those were two. I just want to say there are two factors there. So there's Trump, which is, like you said, a total wild card. And there's also the exhaustion of the Israeli military, which had to come sooner or later. And so it's like a question of attrition, right? Like Israel is trying to exterminate the population of Gaza, and they get a blank check from the West. And the resistance in Gaza is trying to find a threshold beyond which the Israeli military is unable to continue. And so like the whole war, I was watching this and thinking, what's gonna happen first? Like who's gonna break first? And to me, it seems like Israel broke first. So that's like, I guess that's my reaction when we look at Trump. I think there are very many questions about Trump and why he did this and what he's going to do next. And that's already a kind of a real power card in his hand. The fact that nobody, friends or enemies, has any idea what this person is going to do next. And yeah, that's what makes this all like more interesting. With the under the Democrats, while Biden was in power, it was a feeling of just despair, right? Like, every time they come out and say something, it's going to be a lie. They come out and say these sweet words about civilians in Gaza, while they're killing them. Meanwhile, Trump is saying this horrendous racist stuff, and he's the one who tells them to stop. It's a very so yeah, here's a question for you guys that I've been thinking about, because the kind of open racism and open fascism of Trump and his team and everything has got everybody kind of upset, justifiably upsetting. But like, given that it was these liberals that sponsored and ran this genocide for the past year and a half, is like, what's the greater evil now? Like, what can we say about politics in America or in the West, which seems to be a contest between fascism and liberalism? And it's really hard to say who's worse, which is strange. Like for as a leftist, it always has been my whole life I've thought that liberals were like a weak kind of leftist, like a leftist that doesn't have actual conviction. But after watching this genocide, I think the liberals are a totally different creature. They're a totally different kind of creature altogether. Like
Yeah, and
it's
that
not
I would
it's
say
not a continuum between them and us. We're not on the same planet.
I would even say that the liberals, their how can you say that their quality or what was so smart about liberals is that everybody thought they're weak, even though they are the most successful in implementing the most horrible policies. I mean, that already started with Bill Clinton. What Bill Clinton could do, many times the Republicans couldn't do. And at the same time, everybody thought the Democrats are the weaker ones. I mean, it's such a smart play, man. Asal, you wanted to say something?
I mean, I would say that liberals have shown to be more like weak conservatives than weak leftists. If they're weak, that's how they're weak. Because they have to pretend like they're not racist when in fact they're clearly deeply racist. Like I'm sorry, you can't champion a genocide and get away with saying we care about human rights. Like it's just absurd. It's one of the things I do on Twitter is use onion headlines, and the problem has been that they've been fairly accurate. Like it was supposed to be satire. That's what the onion was supposed to be. Like it's satirical, but it's not really. I mean, they are fairly accurate depictions of the current situation, and that gives you an idea of what we're dealing with. Like the Democratic Party is a parody. They are the attempt to use that language, I think, in certain ways makes them more pernicious than the conservatives or the Republicans, because the Republicans seem to be a little bit more honest, at least. I don't agree with them. To your point, Justin, they're saying horribly racist things. They're implementing horribly racist policies. They're doing these things, certainly. But for the most part, the Democrats are doing the same thing. They're just framing it differently and telling different stories, but the end result is the same. And I think there's also a piece that's sort of missing in this discussion when we talk about this like two-party system and this bipartisan continuity that actually exists within them. There's this tendency with the election now, as Trump does horrible things, which he's going to do. Nobody's surprised by that, right? As he implements these horrible policies, especially domestically in the US. Like that's one of the things that you could say that they're different on, right? Certain domestic policies, but even there, they're not that different. And that I think is the part that is sort of left out. The reason, like Trump is not an anomaly. That's the problem with the discussion. Trump is treated, Trump and Trumpism, right? Like we're treating this one individual man like he's some kind of, if we just get rid of him, then everything will be fine. And that is so far from the truth. Like there are people who would be much, much worse than him, actually, because their policy positions are worse. Like they would be more hawkish on so many different policies. What's interesting about him and why he has this ability to sort of be unpredictable and flexible at the same time is that he's really reading a room. He'll do things based on whatever is happening in that moment. There was one moment as an example during the election where he's at one of his own rallies and the audience starts chanting Genocide Joe. And at first he kind of looks like, how does he react to this? How does he react to this? Because why are they
You're
chanting
not
genocide?
lying.
Talking about a genocide in Gaza, right? Like this is to call it a genocide, a sort of anti-Israel. This is the thinking, right? But then he picks up on it exactly. He says, well, they're not lying. So he's this really interesting ability, like a social intelligence, right? To pick up on what the sort of like vibe is and play off of that. That's why he has contradictory policies. That's why he says contradictory things, because he's just dealing with whoever is in the room with him then, and he's trying to sort of cater to those things because he wants to be seen as the problem solver, the deal maker, the one who's doing everything well. But he's treated like this era of American politics is somehow bizarre, but it isn't. It's the logical conclusion of years of liberal policy, actually. That is what
But
got
like,
us here.
but
Yeah.
like to the thing that the amazing thing about him or in this particular question is the fact that he broke the taboo, right? Like there's like you're supposed to be a deal maker and whatever, but like Israel's not supposed to be something that you question. You're not supposed to be rude to Netanyahu, to send your envoy to Netanyahu and tell him what's going to happen. Like that, none of that stuff is supposed to happen. There's supposed to be a certain deference to Israel that, like, now that that's back on the table, I don't know. It just makes the situation a little more interesting.
Well, I
But
think there's
I
an
would say that that is sorry quickly, Peter. I would say that that is another one of those smart aspects of the Democrats. The Democrats make you believe that they are in awe of Netanyahu, that Netanyahu is running the show, and everybody again blames the Zionists and Netanyahu, which are of course very much to blame. But in the background, it's again the Democrats running the show and running the genocide. I'm really convinced after what just happened with Trump that when we had Moin Rabbani on and he said, no, it's not the tail wagging the dog, it is the US who's driving. I think his thesis has more support right now, and the Democrats played us again in that sense. Sorry,
Well,
go
just
ahead.
to follow up on what Assal said, if there were an organized left in the U.S., like an actual party structure and whatnot, it would be great for them to like go out and protest in support of Trump's pressure on Israel and try to use that venality, that narcissism, that reading the room, that reading the vibe to I mean, God knows if it would work and who gives a shit because it wouldn't really matter if a few people show up at a protest and try to make some media campaign. I mean, whatever in the long scheme of things. But that would be the kind of strategy you would want to do with a guy like that that is so I forgot the word you used exactly, Asal, but venal, narcissistic, reading the room, having a sense of vibe, blah blah blah. But of course, we don't have that organized left as of now.
That's such a good point, man. Never thought about that. That's such a good point.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, if he's the because he doesn't have a political ideology, like this cannot be emphasized enough. He does not have a political ideology. He does not care about authoritarianism, he does not care about international law, he does not care about alliances, he does not care about human rights, and he doesn't pretend to. That's the other part of it that's fascinating. He doesn't care because you could say all of that about Joe Biden and the Democrats too, right? His whole he's a decent man is absurd. Decent men don't oversee genocides. That's ridiculous. But Trump presents basically a person who has, I think, two objectives really. One is personal, right? There's this very, very personal ego that he's feeding constantly, which is why if you're a person in the room with him and you can talk to him, you could probably get somewhere because this is so important to him. And the other part is he's a businessman and he wants to make deals. I mean, when he talks about Gaza, he talks about a coastline. Like that's his first thought is, yeah, first of all, he admits that they destroyed it, right? He says, like, there's nothing left. But then follows up immediately with, and it's a beautiful spot, So it's just that his mind does not operate in the way that we can talk about an average politician. Um, but again, like I said, in my view, he's just a sort of logical consequence of the systems we've put in place. Because if you think about it, right, if ultimately your entire system is run on the concept that the only thing that matters is profit, that's it, right? Human beings do not matter. Like ultimately, if you were to sum up what is our system is one in which human lives matter for nothing, and the only thing that matters is profit, right? If you take that line, he's the logical conclusion. because all that matters to him is that it's the business deal, it's the deal making. That's the only thing that matters. And so now you have this sort of logical absurdity of where we've gotten. But the way that as things will happen under Trump, you'll see so many people that will blame the liberals, that will blame people who criticized Biden, people who criticized Harris, people who said, well, we don't want to vote for, people who are committing genocide. They will be blamed, not the ones who didn't listen, not the people who didn't listen over and over again. Like we had to relive 2016. This is the most bizarre thing that we had to do. Like they just thought, we'll just do this one more time and maybe this time it'll work itself out. And clearly it didn't. So it's not the fault of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans and young Americans and Black Americans and whoever didn't come out to vote for Kamala Harris because they're not responsible for voting. Voting is a right, and that right allows you to object to voting to someone for someone too. It was a refusal by the Democrats to listen, not only to not listen, but to belittle and insult anyone who tried to question it. Right? When there were protests at all of these different functions. I mean, what kind of campaign are you running when you're constantly interrupted by protesters? What do
I'm
you need to
speaking.
not understand that there's something wrong with the candidates you are putting when you are repeatedly being interrupted by protesters? What were the responses to that from the top, from someone like Barack
I'm
Obama, who
speaking.
basically told them to be quiet, to Harris herself, who said, I'm speaking, to DNC delegates who literally mocked protesters outside of the conference, plugging their ears, who were naming Palestinian children killed. And then the nerve to say, you guys did this. No, you did it to
But
yourselves. You care. You
but
knew.
what did they do? They voted in somebody who stopped the genocide. So it's not even like I don't even know if we should be saying this is your fault is the right like this is your glory. This is to your credit.
I will respectfully push back and say it's less about that, the criticism of Trump. The criticism of Trump will come from everything else that he does. So even if he does, even if
Right.
this ceasefire holds, right? And that would be a
Hmm.
significant accomplishment. And I don't think anybody could
Yeah.
deny that. At the same time, as he's stripping Americans and immigrants and all of these people of rights within the borders of the United States and things he'll do outside of
Maybe
those borders
taking over Canada.
and Greenland and the Panama Canal
And
and the
Greenland
Gulf of
and
Mexico.
Panama.
Might as well
Gulf,
make
I think you
imperialism
meant
make
the
it
Gulf
again.
of America. So sorry. Gulf of
On
America. It's the
Xiaohongshu,
Gulf of
they're
America.
recommending that it be called the Gulf of Luigi.
Oh, they're good. They're so good.
Well, I guess the liberals are just turned out to be what Malcolm X already warned us for. I mean, these are the wolves in sheep's clothes, and it's such so. I mean, you just start to forget all the things that happened. So many things happened. I was thinking about once writing an article about all the big things that happened during the genocide. I mean, so many horrible things to just not forget all these situations. And when you talk about the liberals and all the stuff that happened, I mean, yeah, that moment of Kamala Harris saying, I'm speaking in that typical, well, head wobbling, eyebrow raising style. Or indeed, those moments that these people were putting their fingers in their ears when they were calling out the names of the victims. That is just so liberalism. All these upper class liberals. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people who, when they say that, imply, on the other hand, that, oh, then you can better have Republicans. I'm not saying that. They have their own depravity. I mean, they have the more direct depravity. Let's say it like that. But that indirect, hypocritical depravity of liberals putting their fingers in their ears while at the same time whining about women's rights in Iran. Oh man, I will not say the words, but I can't handle these kind of people.
Yeah, I think nobody's saying anything because it's just such a widely shared feeling.
I mean, you say women's rights in Iran, and obviously, as a woman of Iranian heritage, I I identify with the idea and I care about it deeply. But one of the great frustrations of being an American of Iranian heritage is how often that rhetoric is weaponized and not applied consistently. I think I think everybody, I think women everywhere should have
Let
full
me
rights.
now let me now do a disclaimer, Asal. I don't mean that women's rights in Iran are not important. I mean that those
I didn't take
hypocritical
it that way.
liberals don't care about women's being bombed in Palestine, but at the same time whine about headscarves in Iran, you know?
No, no, and that's exactly how I took it. I did not take it that you didn't think that it was important because I know that you clearly do. It's so you don't even have to give that like disclaimer or caveat. I know that because that's my whole point is even personally for me as a woman of Iranian heritage, it's like I have to make that kind of statement because for some reason it's not assumed. But it's like, well, of course, I think that people anywhere in the world should have the same rights that I would advocate for ourselves. The problem becomes the people who do not apply that logic to everyone, right? They will, to your point, talk about women's rights in Iran because Iran is a US adversary and it fits and it aligns with this Islamophobic, like, white savior complex. They have to be saved from their oppression while Muslim women are being slaughtered in Gaza. Like you care more about the only time they seem to care about Muslim women is when they're wearing a headscarf, but not when they're being slaughtered in mass. And so it's it's a bizarre kind of space to exist in. And those are the inconsistencies that when people see it, I think that's what changed the narrative so much when it came to Israel-Palestine over this last 15 months. Because the US is a highly, highly propagandized state. I mean, we're flooded, inundated with propaganda constantly. We don't call it that. We call it the news. It's not. It's propaganda. That's what we are seeing. Um, Whether it's our political discourse, our news media, our popular culture, we are consistently bombarded with a very specific narrative, which is completely one-sided. But this event, this genocide, these atrocities, these crimes, so egregious that everyone could see it with their own eyes, and it became impossible. And that's what created the shift. Unfortunately, that is what created the shift. And I was actually, speaking to someone the other day, and we were sort of making this point that if you look at the history of anti-Semitism in Europe and the United States, that's where it is. It's a European like anti-Semitism. The Holocaust happened in Europe, right? Anti-Semitism is a very Christian white European phenomenon. More so, I'm not saying it doesn't exist anywhere else. I'm simply saying the most uh, extreme examples of it exist within the Western world. So what happened? What changed? Because you would never think of it in this context anymore, right? It was the Holocaust. The crimes against Jewish people were so unbelievable, so difficult for human minds to process that it actually humanized people who had been dehumanized within those populations for such a long time. And in a way, that's what we've seen because once you see these images, the most visceral reactions that people have come out, right? It goes beyond the politics. When you see children's bodies shredded apart over and over and over again, when you see men weeping over their loved ones, when you see parents searching through rubble, there is, a humanity within all of us. Well, most of us, that I think it shreds through those layers and it gets past all of that propaganda because if you're just a normal person, there's no way you can see this and not be moved by it. There's no way you can see these images every single day and not be affected by it.
Yeah, two quick things. One thing on your last point, it behooves us to remind ourselves that as shitty as our current media system is, we should remind ourselves that it's significantly less shitty than the media systems that existed pre-internet, because those systems would never have broadcasted the depravity, the barbarity of what's actually going on in Gaza, whereas with internet media, it's at least seeable, viewable by a lot of people, even if it takes, active choices to access that information.
That's
And the
why they
second
want
point
people
that's
like
even
that's one
worse,
just quickly, Peter. That's why they want people like Elon Musk running the show
yeah,
to turn
and
that stuff also in a cesspool of right-wing extremism.
got to be a US owner for TikTok so that they can have their arms twisted to manage their algorithm the way that the government wants. And then on the other point, it's even worse because it's the rhetoric that's used is, oh, you don't care about Iranian women because you don't want to bomb them because they attach their proposed solution to the care. So, oh, you don't want regime change in Iran, which would involve bombing the country and killing tons of women, men, and children. Well, then clearly you don't care about Iranian women. And of course, that is the exact same rhetoric that's used everywhere. You don't care about Iraqis because you don't want to bomb them. You don't care about terrorism because you don't want to bomb men, women, and children in Gaza. Do you condemn Hamas? Well, yeah, sure. I certainly did compared to the PLO or PFLP, and because the Israeli government supported them, but the condemnation of Hamas is linked to, oh, so therefore you want to go bomb men, women, and children in Gaza. And that's the rhetoric that's used in every single foreign policy example from the US's blob, is their bloody mass murder solution is rhetorically linked to supposed care about vulnerable people.
Your
Yeah,
thoughts, Justin?
it's an imperialism of like love, you know, all those memes of like the bombing jet with all the LGBT symbols on it and stuff. But like talking about the media landscape, um, it just made me think that, when you talk about if we had a left and things like that, the way that we've been excluded from these dialogues so that all of the debate is between liberals and conservatives. And so like they want to make sure that for the most part people don't even know that we exist, right? Like we have thousands of people watching, but like there's millions and millions and millions of people that are watching that are listening to Joe Rogan or whatever. And
Or Ben
like, yeah, Joe
Shapiro?
Rogan had Joe Rogan had Abby Martin on once 200 years ago or something, but like he has, 200 episodes a year and it's always, he has Zuckerberg on and Trump on and all these people on and like every billionaire has been on there at least once or twice. But I was just thinking like because of that exclusion and because they kind of know that the masses that are watching if nothing that they see is represented at all in their media, they will get suspicious. They will look for alternatives. So what ends up happening is like these issues are taken up by the right. So it's like Candace Owens has been like taking up the genocide or who's the other person? Anyway, there's like a bunch of these ultra right wingers that are like anti-genocide and it's
Nick
I sort of
Fuentes,
see it
maybe? Nick Fuentes?
and I don't know the landscape that well. I think it was yeah. I wasn't thinking of him. I was thinking of Candace and
Tucker
anyway,
Carlson,
I
maybe.
lost it. Maybe Tucker. Yeah. Probably Tucker. So it's like the when I think about it as a system, they have to make sure to exclude and you've written about this too, like even on the alternative media and the way they sort of like make sure that the voices that are talking about these things are talking about these topics, but like the experts that you're going to go to are going to be these voices. And so it's like, okay, well, the anti-genocide position is Candace Owens, who's like, if you listen to Candace Owens on a range of topics, you're gonna find some stuff that is, I wonder like how she came to this. Like, it doesn't make sense that you could have these views and also be. Anyway, I've just been thinking like that this is well designed to re-co-opt people. But you think of liberalism as the engine of co-optation, but I do think politics are shaking up a little bit in a way that it seems like on some issues like war and peace or genocide, it's going to be the conservatives that are co-opting some of these left positions and kind of trying to beat us to the public, are not give us a chance to make our case because they're stealing our arguments.
Yeah, there's one very prominent, very scary precedent for exactly that. I think you guys all know what I'm talking about.
Socialists,
Yeah,
something
the
something
the
socialists,
Nazis,
NSDAP. Yeah.
getting some economic ideas from the left and using that to gain popularity for their psychotic ideas.
And that's because the Nazis are allowed in the Overton window that we live in. I mean, let's
Yeah.
say, let's not forget the ruling classes allow Nazism above leftism. And I'm talking about real
Yes.
leftism. So when things get very tough, they allow these fascists to get into power to siphon away people's anger, and they will not whatever happens allow real leftist solutions to enter the mainstream debates. So that's why you get people like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. That's why you get people like Nigel Farage. That's why you get people like Maloney. That's why you get people like Marine Le Pen. You get all these people because they are allowed to co-opt the anger of the working classes, and that also gives me as somebody who is who considers himself a real leftist. And I always hate the word real because you always have people who claim to be the real ones and they often are very dogmatic. But what I'm trying to say is more left than liberals. Let's say it like that. And I must admit, guys, I have never felt so powerless as the past year. I mean,
Mhm.
I thought we were powerless, but the past year with
Mhm.
protests and
Mhm.
anything, and I felt so incredibly powerless.
Mhm.
And it shows that we have a lot of work to do, man. How do we get out of this chokehold? What can we do now? I mean, how do you guys see that going from here? So we have a so-called ceasefire. Let's see. But what can we do? How to go forward as people who try to avoid this from ever happening again, and also to hope to we also hope that the Palestinians get a better situation now, and that we don't let it slide. That we now forget about it. Next things that are going on in the world, we focus on them. We totally forget about. I think now we actually need to step up our game for the Palestinians to not slide back, to help Palestinians at least to not slide back into the old situation of apartheid or another or a continuation of the genocide. So, question is, considering the powerlessness that we have been confronted with, where to go from here? Asal, maybe you, yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think that's really important is you're specifically talking about like the ceasefire in Gaza and where do we go? I think these conversations and just people becoming educated on these topics is so important because, we talked earlier about this idea that they were so propagandized. So like, where do people get information from? Um, when I think Justin said it earlier about, the exhaustion from the military exhaustion from the Israeli side. Like what gets us here? It's not just because Netanyahu comes into power, but it's a war of attrition and over time, like someone has to sort of give up. So interesting is Blinken, just days before the end of their administration, basically went on the record and said that Hamas has recouped anyone that's basically anybody that's been killed, any Hamas militants that have been killed or over this period of time, they've recouped all those numbers anyways. Which who could have predicted, right? Like who would have predicted that if you just kill everyone, you would actually galvanize people to wanting to resist you even more. Oh yeah, everybody, right? Everybody with half a brain already knew this. This is exactly what would happen. I had anecdotally, right? I had people, friends in the States who didn't really follow these things closely before. And then after having just seen these scenes over a while, they would say things like, I mean, if that happened to my child, you're damn right I would fight someone. If my entire family was killed, of course I would be fighting someone. And I'm like, oh, so you guys are getting where this comes from. The problem with the way that this issue tries to be presented always is that the cause is never talked about, right? We compartmentalize. We separate Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We separate the idea of the right of return for Palestinians. All of these things are talked about separately. And then we talk about things in the present, right? Because you can't the sort of infamous notion that nothing before October 7th could justify October 7th, but everything is justified thereafter by October 7th. The absolute moronic, hypocritical stance that gives you that. How does that happen? Because you're basically saying that Palestinian lives don't matter, right? That's why nothing justifies it. Nothing justifies something because those lives didn't matter to begin with, but these lives do matter. And that's why it's okay to kill 40, 50, 60. We don't even have any idea in reality what the death toll is, right? We don't know what the actual death toll is. It's justified to do that because of this event, but what is the cause? They'll talk about Hamas, 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 Hamas. Okay, Hamas didn't exist until 1987. The occupation did. Like, it's so frustrating to listen to this stuff because no one wants to talk about the cause. And where does white supremacy and Islamophobia play into this? Because how do they try to explain it? Well, they hate us because we're free. They hate us because their religion forces them to hate us. Second largest religion on the planet, but okay, that's the problem, right? Like one of the funniest and most ridiculous memes I've ever seen was this is years ago. It was said something like there's 1.7 billion Muslims in the world. If we wanted everybody dead, you'd be dead. Like it's like there's so many Muslims in the world that it cannot just be the religion. Like it's all of these things when you think about it together, and I know that I'm ranting a little bit because it's so frustrating, but when you say where do we go? We go to, okay, now you guys, now so many people in the public, people who were not privy, people who were not paying attention to these things, suddenly we have their attention. Okay, so now they need to know all of this background. This is the problem is when people become educated about something, I genuinely believe when they have the information, they change their minds. It is, and Peter should probably speak to this more than anybody else, it is where they're getting their information from that is so important. And when you are bombarded with propaganda from morning till night, that's what you're going to believe because nobody else is giving you information. Why do you think they went after TikTok? I mean, they told you. The head of the ADL, Secretary Blinken, they said it outright. They were like, well, the next war is going to be online. So why do they want to get rid of TikTok? Because that's where people were getting information from. They were seeing all of the images that you don't see in Western media, and that Palestinian journalists were being slaughtered intentionally because they were feeding these images out to the world. That's what they were seeing, and that's what shifted things. That's what changed the view of people in the US, despite all of these layers of propaganda. And that's why you had people on the campaign trail shouting Genocide Joe everywhere they went, whether they were apparently at Republican rallies or Democratic rallies. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like Peter, you should add to the where information is actually significant. But I think in terms of power for for the people like us, for the four of us sitting here and like-minded people, it's if you have that knowledge, we have to get it to other people.
Yeah, 100%. I'll just follow up really quick. What you said is exactly right. I think we need a party organization that means joining existing parties or ideally a party. And if it needs direction, changing its direction. And then also educating people. And that's an absolutely essential part. Information politics does matter. Agreed. Protests out in the street have proven themselves to not be a very effective way of spreading information. But with the modern means of mass communication that we have, that's one thing that people can try to do. And of course, it's even more effective if you can talk to people IRL in front, face to face, and try to give them perspectives that they've never encountered before. Don't expect them to immediately agree with you once you bury them under a snow mountain of facts. It's going to take some time. Human minds don't change just like that. So be patient, try to educate, and build an actual organization.
Yeah, I always
Interesting.
say like I don't need like a, a plan for taking power in the next electoral cycle. But I would appreciate if people like, I'll even settle for like a 50-year plan. What's your 50-year plan? In 50, what if you had 50 years to get like the left into power? What would you do? And then what would you do now to accomplish that in 50 years? Because it's like we don't even have that, right? Like we don't even have like 100-year plan. It's always just like we go to the next demo or like we just, we do like something immediate. And so I just think there's like all of these conflicts, like this whole war, every dramatic event that happened in this war was a result of long-term preparation, right? Like when you think of like the image of these resistance fighters and their RPGs, those RPGs were like manufactured in Gaza, right? The ordnance was manufactured in Gaza. The supply lines were established over years. They were throwing rocks and then they were and the rockets, like all of those things were years and years in the making. Or think of like even on the side of the evildoers, like the pager operation, which was one day, that was years of sort of depraved genius that went into that operation to murder, to try to murder thousands of people. So it's like all of these, everything that happens that like looks like this flare up is the result of patient, you know, building and thinking and strategizing over a long time. And so like it's helpless. It's helpless. Like we are helpless. Like we have to start from a recognition of that powerlessness. And what we do now is not going to amount to very much. But like, I think for me, as a political project, as a media project, I think the analysis of like the importance of independence, the importance of like, there's not a lesser evil here anymore. Like, we're not, we should not, leftists should not periodically throw their weight behind the liberals to try to stop the right. I just don't think we should ever do that again. And I am kind of proud of the Americans who didn't vote for Kamala. Who couldn't bring themselves to do it. They couldn't bring themselves to that lesser evil position. And I just think that's a crack that is something new. It's like you're supposed to be disciplined in lining up. Like you can say what you want in between, you can have your critique from the left and blah blah blah, but like when the chips are down, you've got to go with the liberals, and they didn't. And it seems to have paid off. Like whatever, even if the war starts again, whatever relief we've had 2,400 trucks worth of relief. We've had a few days worth of relief because Kamala Harris didn't win the election. So
Yep. Yep.
that's
Yep. Well
that's my
said. Well
thinking.
said. And it also, like you say, I think they deserve credit. These Arab young Arab voters who decided to not vote for the Democrats. I think it was a very good sign that Arabs voted as a bloc for a change and are a group to take into consideration in the political scene. I mean, the most extreme example are, of course, Zionist Jews mostly. Um, but when it comes to another ethnic group, for example, Arabs, they were always just ignored. And I think in this case, they have shown that they are an important constituency. Um, I think we will end it here, and it was very great to have you on, Justin. Everybody go to Justin's channel, the Anti-Empire Project. Lots of good talks, bit comparable to this, if I may say so. and, uh, and just one little thing also, what you said about organizing. I think that's such an important point that you say we need to organize and engage in long-term organizing as well. Like for example, what the Arab resistance did, but also, for example, what Iran has done over the years. And I think this is very true. And Gerald Horne also always says that. He says it's so important for leftists and oppressed groups in general to start organizing across borders, real international organizing, as you had in the old days, when people from the United States civil rights era activists would literally travel to Algeria to meet with activists there, and they had conferences and all that kind of stuff. We have been so individualized in the age of free market neoliberalism that we just don't know how to organize anymore. We're all little atoms, little islands, social islands in a sea of human beings that just are unconnected. Anyway, with the time's up, so let's leave it here. Thank you all for this very great talk, and we're definitely gonna repeat this again with of course our regular co-host Assal, and we're gonna invite Justin as well. So let's see if you have time, join us again, and see you guys next time.
Yeah, good talking with you guys.
All right.
Thank you.